I feel like I almost have to give a trigger warning here. If there are any Bitcoin maximalists who wandered into the room, some of this material may be a bit triggering for them.
It's an asset, and so it's potentially a store of value. It's an investment if you think it's going to go up. It might also go down. So I don't necessarily think of framing it as just a store of value by itself is really that meaningful. It's just like any other asset that you might think it would grow if people are using the system more, and the system's very popular, is providing a lot of utility. The price of Bitcoin will go up, but if people shifted to some other system, the price would go down.
I think Bitcoin is the Ford Model T in my analogy earlier. It was the first breakthrough that gave us a lot of attention, hope, and hype about how that technology could be used. But it hasn't shown the ability to scale or mature to be used in an enterprise way. So when you look at things like scalability, get 2 to 8 transactions a second, that's not going to solve enterprise use cases or even a growing number of retail use cases. Mining is still shown to be very inefficient and costly from an environmental and energy perspective. So I think it was indeed a breakthrough, but you have to take the technology and evolve it. Very similar to Ethereum, and Ethereum I think now has very clear examples of how that's evolved. You can look at Quorum, the JP Morgan platform that is based off Ethereum and specialized for their use cases. I think securities and trade finance is where they're focusing on some of those platforms. But it's this cycle of specialization that has to occur. So I give Bitcoin a lot of credit in that it was that breakthrough, but I think for greater use, particularly in enterprise setting, I think it lacks the governance right now to be able to evolve that platform forward. Now, that doesn't mean I do want to say, I think some of the retail use cases, the first use case for Bitcoin and digital currency was very retail focused. And I do see that meeting consumer needs. And consumers are using that for remittances. In many cases, there's also a lot of speculative investing there. So I do think that is indeed, it's meeting needs. We do need some regulation around that now to make sure that's done safely. But there's this recognition that there's many use cases now emerging, not all retail, some enterprise as well, including for the digital currency.
Generally, if you sort of zoom out, do you feel like the level of innovation in these areas is a little bit like we kind of play a little bit of catch up in the US compared to Europe in these areas?
No, I don't think we play catch up at all. I mean, I think, in general, we have more evolved markets. And when you have more evolved markets, you tend to want to be a little bit more careful in how they change. I mean, I think the US is really the leader in really a lot of technology and engineering and everything else. There are big markets where, kind of there's nothing, and it's a lot easier to start these things, and whether it was China or India or other things when you're starting from scratch. Now, I will make one comment, okay, and this is something we need to balance on innovation. So there was a lot of things I had a lot of experience coming into government with. The one area I had no experience, and I'm happy to say I had no experience, and I kind of got a crash course PhD in, was sanctions. So at Treasury, we manage all the sanctions programs, and I probably spend half my time on this. And sanctions are very important. Combating financial terrorism is very important. So one of the things I think of as we talk about innovation is in the United States, kind of we have our anti-money laundering laws apply, okay, to whether it's crypto assets or wallets and things like that. I think we got to be careful as we talk about innovation, and we got to strike the right balance of kind of making sure that our financial system isn't used for bad purposes with creating enough innovation that we don't have bureaucracy around that.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Первый вопрос, будет ли у России какая-нибудь своя криптовалюта? Второе, будет ли это как-нибудь контролироваться государством? И в-третьих, считаете ли вы, что в ближайшем будущем криптовалюта полностью заменит наши обычные стандартные деньги?
Вопрос, который вам задали, он задан несколько некорректно, потому что своей криптовалюты у России не может быть по определению. Так же, как не может быть своей криптовалюты в любой другой стране. Потому что если мы говорим о криптовалюте, то это то, что выходит за рамки национальных границ.
Yeah, so I do want to differentiate that not all, like Mr. Lair said, not all cryptocurrencies want to establish new alternative currencies, but certainly the majority of the market, which is Bitcoin, does. And we do have laws against this. And I want to be clear that we created these laws because we had problems. We have had problems of private, issuance of coins. The UK had the Stamp Act before that. So we've experienced what it's like to have alternative currencies, and we have purposefully put that power in the federal government.
Is Bank of America in the Bitcoin business?
Absolutely not. Here's the way we think about this. There are two different concepts to separate here. Digital currency. We've had digital currency for years and years. A wire transfer is the movement of money digitally. Those are established, they are regulated, the practices around them are transparent. We know who is the sender and who is the receiver of everything we send. Anonymous currency is a whole different thing. And the idea around Bitcoin is to ensure that the sender and the receiver are unknown. And that, by definition, flies in the face of everything the financial system does to protect not only U.S. citizens, but the world. All day long, we'll drive for the digital movement of money. It's efficient, and we've already talked about its protection. But anonymous currency flies in the face of what the financial, of every construct known to transparency in the movement of money and how we use it to prevent and detect other really important forms of crime.
Though while Libra may have begun this conversation, the blockchain and cryptocurrency system is diverse. It seems to me that these technologies and other digital innovations are inevitable. They could be beneficial, and I believe the U.S. should lead in their development. That can't happen without clear rules of the road. As the U.S. develops a more comprehensive regulatory approach, care must be taken in determining what gaps may be present in the existing framework. In mid-July, Treasury Secretary Mnuchin said, "To be clear, the U.S. welcomes responsible innovation, including new technologies that may improve the efficiency of the financial system and expand access to financial services. That being said, with respect to Facebook's Libra and other developments in cryptocurrencies, our overriding goal is to maintain the integrity of our financial system and protect it from abuse." He also noted that
within a lot of these big institutions that on the one hand, yes, they're conservative and they're slow. On the other hand, there's actually a lot of pressure, often from very high levels, boards, CEOs, and so on, to say, well, we need to know this space. We need to be doing something. So actually, you can get, in some sense, acceleration of certain projects because people feel that they want to do something. Now, doing something could be not something sensible, or it could be a science project that, gets shut down later. But on the other hand, if they do something that actually does work, it can get a lot of visibility and quick resources. And actually, I guess what I've seen is a lot of hunger for finding some way to get involved in the space from banks, from central banks. Ripple ran a central bank conference that brought in central bankers from all around the world. I spoke at that last year, and there was an incredible level of education and interest and excitement. Multiple central banks have done pilots. Ripple's done them with Bank of England and Saudi Arabia Central Bank. So I think there's an elevated level of interest that at least gives you, instead of just being sort of something that people are afraid of and it's relegated to like a back room, if you can do something interesting, it can also get elevated. And I think it's been an amazing success case that, Ripple has more than 100 banks signed up. They have, 70 with active commercial deployments in various stages. And then along this path, some of the ones like MoneyGram and Western Union are really interested in the crypto aspect of it. So the blockchain solution is the one that's adopted by more banks. And so that's basically becoming a competitor to SWIFT in their regions of the world where, a lot of banks are joining in, like the Saudi Arabia Central Bank is doing a trial right now. So I think that's like super exciting. It's maybe a little slower than we might have thought to bring the digital asset into it. But if you think about it, this is a very long process. The banks have to get regulatory approval. They need to work with their lawyers. They need to make sure everybody's on board. They need partners to work. And that I often get asked is sort of, why did these creative people, if it's great they invented a security protocol, but why did they have to invent a coin?
Right.
Why did they need to invent a new currency? What's wrong with the dollar? And so they're kind of missing a fundamental point about the way the technology works. If you had an entry on the ledger that said, I have $1, that's only a message, a promise.
Right.
And if I move that IOU to someone else, it's a movement of a promise.
Right.
And the money actually still has to move. We haven't invented a technology to beam a dollar bill onto your keyboard, unfortunately. So, as we wait for that technology, the thing that you can beam.
Think about money. Money has value because it has users. We use it as money. Without users, it would simply be a worthless token. And that's true whether it's a piece of paper with a face on it or a digital token. And the more other people accept money as money, the more I want to use it. So in that respect, the motto would be, the more, the merrier. But today's cryptocurrencies don't necessarily work like that. Well, take Bitcoin. The system works by bringing together two groups. On the one hand are the users who make and receive payments, and on the other are the so-called miners who record the transactions in the ledger. Now the two groups depend on each other because the users need the miners to record the transactions, but the miners also get paid for doing their job. And because the miners can pick and choose which transactions to process, the more you offer to pay the miners, the more likely it is that your transaction will be included in the ledger. Well, fees can rise a lot during peak times. At one point last December, fees reached $57 per transaction. So just imagine, if you bought a $2 coffee with Bitcoin, you would have had to pay $57 to make that transaction go through. So when there's congestion, rather than having the more the merrier, we have to turn the motto on its head. The motto should be now, the more the sorrier. Now this kind of thing happens because some people hold Bitcoin not as money, but as assets, which is to say you pay to hold them rather than to use them as money. And crypto kitties are a good example of this, and they're just like Beanie Babies, baseball cards, and Tamagotchi.
But if you don't have connectivity, you can't even start. So first you get the banks connected. They do what they're doing today better. They like it. They build new services on it. Then they go, I want to do this in 100 countries, but I can't hold currencies in 100 countries. Well, guess what? You got XRP.
So some people have heard me say this before, but I'll throw it out to the audience. What is Interledger's total addressable market size? All the money. Nobody wanted to feed it. Yeah, it's all the money, because what we're really talking about with this idea of the Internet of Value is creating a single global payment network that connects literally everyone and processes maybe not 100%, but 90+% of all the money. That's what we're talking about.
It is, first and foremost, it's an amazing payments platform. That is what it was built for. That's what the original concept was for it, and that's what it does, and it does it really, really well. It's well supported by a company that has stewarded it for 5 years with no issues. Been running in production with real value on it for a very long time as the second biggest cryptocurrency in the world by market cap. A fair distance behind Bitcoin, admittedly, but pretty significant until Ether grew as it did. And personally, I think the only reason that Ripple isn't up there with Ether and Bitcoin is that Ripple as a company hasn't been able to put the focus into it that I think we would have liked to. And the community didn't take hold of it and do something with it as we kind of hoped they would. So if anyone is interested in doing projects on blockchain, wants to look at some really, really awesome blockchain technology, I would encourage you to look at this. Look at Ripple's distributed ledger. If your use case is payments, it is awesome. It is a seriously, seriously impressive piece of technology. Now, I think it's fairly obvious then why, as Ripple, we're so invested in Interledger protocol. It's an open protocol, right? Nobody gains anything by an open protocol itself or by open source software itself. You win in the industry, or you succeed by the fact that you give something to the industry or the community that's open and useful because you trust your ability to execute on top of it. And that's really what Ripple as a company is doing with its commercial solutions. But we genuinely believe that XRP and Ripple's distributed ledger technology will make it, will become more influential globally with interoperability. Because when everything is interoperable, you're no longer competing on reach, you're competing on how good is your network. And personally, I absolutely believe this. Ripple's is up there.
Can you see those? Oh, there's 2 votes.
Let me try.
Do you see IMF holding crypto assets in the future? Oh, they're over here. That's easier. You want to take one? Go for it. The first one's for you. IMF. Do you see IMF holding crypto assets in the future? I did not put that up there.
Remember, I'm from the legal department. I'm supposed to be very conservative about these things. I don't want to go into great details about
Maybe
the
I
IMF.
should take what the IMF is going to do. I think we stunned Ross into silence with that one.
For that to happen, okay, under the current legal framework, some country would have to use a crypto asset as its currency.
Which goes to the next question that was on the list, actually. Will central banks issue digital currency become a reality in the next few years?
Well, again, there's a lot of work being done this through by a number of central banks in different, regions of the world. I think generally speaking, many of these central banks are coming to the conclusion that they don't see the benefits right now of doing it, but they're very seriously considering the use case. And I think as work proceeds, they become a possibility may increase. Particularly the Bank of Canada with its Project Jasper experiment has realized that a central bank digital currency on its own may not offer benefits now, but when combined with other things like the security settlement system, use cases begin to emerge. So let's keep an open mind.
I've always believed from the minute I read the consensus, the white paper on the consensus mechanism for XRP, I believed it had the capability of changing the world. And I've had conversations with Chris Larson and Arthur and David around the fact that it is, I think, transformational software that we kind of owe it our best effort to get it to where it belongs and where it deserves to be.
What is attempted with XRP is not so much maintaining the value, but offering a vehicle for exchange, which is quite different, because there you can have value fluctuating. All you need is value to be stable for 10 seconds while the whole transaction takes place. And as a result, there's a whole different need for regulation. You don't need to regulate value. I don't care. So long as there is some value, the transaction can certainly take place. And as a regulator, I'm not so worried about either this displacing my fiat currency, because you're moving from one fiat currency to another. It's just an interim value. And it's a means of exchange.
Risk reward. We have a great partnership with Ripple. So we think we can lead in terms of the automation, because don't forget, this is about automation. Blockchain is just one piece of the automation to make, in this case, payments more effective, more transparent, faster, and cheaper for the consumer. So there's a number.
Well, what's interesting is gold is still significant. I ask myself if it's a relic of a long history. Why is there $1 trillion held in gold by the world's central banks, plus the IMF and all of the other financial institutions? If it's worthless and meaningless, why is everybody still holding it?
And I think that's what's missing. And so I like the idea of a gold standard. I mean, it could be used in a very cryptocurrency way. The point is, do you have a unified money system so that when you talk about the international marketplace, everyone is playing on a level monetary playing field. And it's very important to have a rules-based approach. And that's why I'm advocating that we need to look at the virtues of a gold standard and try to come up with something much closer to matching those. And then I think we would have more solid economic.
We did actually, there has been a study around how the market is ready to take up and to go for such a business models. Say 75% of the financial institutions today are open to take crypto assets as a bridge currency. This is transformational. I know that in Malta you have a favorable regulation, an open regulation around cryptos. This is not still the same worldwide. There are some markets that are more advanced. But I think the pressure coming from the industry will help this industry become more relevant in the time.
In these things. And then finally, from building currencies, digital assets, ICOs typically say, okay, this is a currency for this use case and none other. That's kind of the opposite of the way it should go. Currencies need to be as liquid as possible, and so they need to have as many use cases as possible. For XRP, for example, the kind of early beachhead has been cross-border payments, but we see that as just the beginning of something that really has a multitude of use cases to get as liquid as possible. That's what drives utility and value at the end of the day. So I think on all fronts, ICOs are problematic, and that's why you're seeing the regulators crack down on them. Not everywhere, but I think they'll be transformed. They'll probably look like, IPOs at the end of the day.
Hello everyone, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever is it that you are. My name is Shantanu Dutt.
So that brings us to the point of understand. So now we have an understanding of what a blockchain is, how are blocks committed to the blockchain, what are the different mechanisms, consensus mechanisms in place, because consensus is what really forms the core of blockchain. I mean, decentralization is great, immutability is great, shared ledger is great, but consensus mechanism is what really differentiates all of these networks. So you have permissionless blockchains, you have permissioned blockchains. A permissionless blockchain is anyone can be a part of that network. So for example, Bitcoin, even you and me can be a part of that network, right? Whereas with something like Hyperledger, it's a very permissioned blockchain. So only certain nodes can be a part of that blockchain network. Only certain nodes can be committers on that ledger. And there will be a certain node that will decide randomly that this particular node can be the committer. What that allows them to do is increase the scale of transactions that they can process, because it's limited, it's not miners coming in and trying to compete. And that's why the Bitcoin network is slow today, whereas some of these other networks like Hyperledger, more permission networks can be faster. But obviously it goes against the point of decentralization. You're again going back somewhere in the centralization space. So depending on your use case, for enterprises who want to form private consortiums or maybe a closed network, a Hyperledger or Ripple can be a more viable solution.
So first of all, and in our mind, by doing so, there are a number of things that start to happen. So for example, if you lower the cost of international remittance to the minuscule level, through which you are able to encourage peer-to-peer sending money between each other. So for example, if you today needed to send 100 rupees to buy something from overseas, you're not able to because the transaction cost is very high. So we unleash a very different form of export and import, which is essentially not happening today by lowering the transaction cost. The second thing, if you look at enterprise, a lot of money is stuck in working capital. So for example, if you are a supplier which is supplying goods on a 30-day contract terms and you're getting paid in 33 days, but now after a Ripple is put into the bank that you are essentially using, you get paid exactly on the 30th day. That means you have the 3 days of extra working capital, which is 10% of your working capital. And if you look at it on a yearly basis, that is 36 days of working capital that is available to you for extra use. So that's a cost that is not incurred by you as a business, or that is an opportunity that is available to you to get an extra customer. So to my mind, this increases the velocity of money in the system, which directly impacts the GDP. In some way, it is exactly what is being done in the domestic system. As the domestic system is becoming more electronified or digitized, and that flow of money, the faster flow of money is increasing the GDP, the same opportunity we have in the global remittance space as well, where faster remittances, error-free remittances, cheaper remittances are going to have the same effect on the working capital cycle. And Ripple is here to do that, right? I mean, working along with the banks, we are working with individuals and companies to bring these solutions to them.
So I think in terms of the policy work, we should be working in parallel tracks where we explore ways to improve the current system, and there's plenty of scope to do that, as well as to think of how to set up the institutional backing that could, if needed or if there is a demand, can serve a new system based on a token currency. And as always, we should look back and just learn the lessons of history and try to separate out what's really useful from what is just hype. And I think as policymakers, we owe it to our constituents to actually do that.
Very good. Fantastic. So let's conclude. I think we learned that we have the technology to do something new with central bank money, but the governance and institutional framework obviously are key in order to allow for an orderly integration of these new possibilities into our national and also in particular international payments relations. I would like to thank the Bank of Spain very much and Reinventing Bretton Woods committee for organizing this conference.
The Federal Reserve was created by Congress as the nation's central bank to promote a stable economy and a safer, more flexible financial system.
My studies encompass current financial and economic conditions, as well as historical antecedents tracing back to our Constitution.
Some have tried to characterize your support for the gold standard as outside the mainstream thought and disqualifying for this position. What exactly are your views on monetary policy and the gold standard?
I would not advocate going back to a prior historical monetary arrangement. I think it's really important to acknowledge that the power to regulate the value of U.S. money is given to Congress by our Constitution, and Congress has created the Federal Reserve as an independent agency and given it its monetary mandate. That is the framework under which I will make decisions if confirmed as a member of the Board of Governors. Because as you suggested, rival nations are working very diligently to have an alternative to the dollar. And while they can't beat us as a currency, they can add features because there is a demand for digital access to banking services, to payments, and I think it's very important that we get ahead of the curve to ensure that the dollar continues to offer the best currency in the world, the most respected, the most utilized, and we need fintech innovation to keep us going in the right direction and to be a leader instead of passively observing what other countries might do. To floating rates, if you asked 90% of economists, they would have been against it. So the trend changes, and just now, if economists now say, no, we don't want to talk about stable exchange rates or anything related to gold is somehow nostalgic or backward looking, I think they're not being sophisticated in a way and thinking forward to what kind of a future world with globalization what you could use if you wanted to have a neutral, unified money system, if you wanted to have a common reference point with no political baggage, that is, it wasn't dominated by any one country. But the fact that international monetary system that provides a foundation for productive growth. So just getting the language in. It used to be Treasury would always say, we want a strong dollar. Well, if you mean a dependable dollar, yes. But let's say dependable dollar, because President Trump actually understands the impact of a strong or a weak dollar on economic performance. And he said the only thing great about a strong dollar is it sounds good, but in fact it can cause us problems as well. Right. So I think we'll see more of a focus. I would like to see that lead to some other initiatives. I'll be doing my best, but I can't promise. And it depends on the timing and the necessity.
We live in exceptional times and they require exceptional actions. As governments around the world are striving to save lives and protect livelihoods, they're also thinking about the recovery to come. And we must not miss this opportunity to make it a green recovery. What does it mean? First, it means to promote green investments. Not brown, not gray. Second, it means taking the opportunity of very low oil prices to move towards elimination of fossil fuel subsidies and to price carbon right. And third, it means to come with imagination of what investments we can make that lead to green jobs and lead to a more sustainable future as we put fiscal stimulus in place. We can do it.
XRP is having a summer slump. Do you expect a rebound in the fall?
You know what, I think what's really important is that any digital asset to be valuable has to be serving an actual use case. It can't just be speculation. Obviously, a lot of the market today is really speculative. But we think over the long run, it's going to be that combination of deep liquidity, market makers, institutional bets being made. But very importantly, it has to have a use case. We think the use case for the XRP ledger and XRP, the digital asset, is really around initially reducing the cost of liquidity for cross-border payments. Long term, though, we think it's a key winner in this race to be another digital asset for the world for all kinds of use cases. So that's the way you say it. It's a long-term play, has to have value, can't just be a store of value for store of value's sake, has to actually have a use case, and that's how we see this evolving.
Many people are using cryptos just to buy and sell and make quick gains out of it. Does it hurt the growth of cryptocurrencies, that usage for a quick buck?
So it's kind of chicken and egg. You have to create a marketplace. And right now we have about 150, 200 exchanges around the world that trade in XRP. A lot of it, as you say, is very shallow trading by individuals. And that is not the use case that we are pursuing. What we are pursuing is the use of XRP as a financial asset by sophisticated institutions as a bridging mechanism. So does this hurt or harm? Well, it creates a lot of noise. And we certainly don't want that much noise, but we're waiting. And for example, this last quarter, the bulk of XRP sales were to institutional investors. And as this transitions away from retail to institutions who start to use it for wholesale, financial usage, that's when the turning point will come.
Got it.
Then, if we look at stablecoin initiatives, especially like global stablecoin initiatives, of course, there are a number of issues which arise. Some of them were mentioned, like on anti-money laundering. I will also mention tax evasion, consumer protection, personal data protection. So the whole range of issues which needs to be addressed. So what we did recently in European Union, we made what we call regulatory mapping of different crypto assets, including stable coins, looking where they fit in current EU legal system. Do we need some new rules? And basically the conclusion is that yes, especially for crypto assets like stablecoins, we are likely to need new rules, and we'll be preparing them in a context of our next FinTech action plan. But one thing I want to say, in a sense, we don't want to regulate financial innovation out of Europe. We want to regulate financial innovation in Europe while addressing potential risks.
You've dabbled with blockchains in your past and cryptocurrencies as well. How did that work out for you?
I think we are still investing there. We have our own group, invest only on the blockchain and on the cryptocurrency. We did also a test with Ripple, and we are still doing it. And
it's still ongoing.
Still ongoing. We are looking at it, and we are really learning from Ripple.
You said a year or so ago, when you were using Ripple's product, that it was, quote, still too expensive. You didn't see.
Yeah, I mean, we are in a different. They just announced with MoneyGram, as you know, yesterday or the day before, an announcement that they're investing there. And
they took an activist-sized investor stake in MoneyGram.
Yes,
10%.
And obviously, we are in a different position than MoneyGram. We are, we have our own settlement system, which is extremely cost efficient. Today, it showed us, as we do in the test, it's 5 times more expensive doing with a cryptocurrency, with a stable currency like Ripple. But it's others. For us, it's different. But I just saw Brad before coming to this meeting. I said, "Hey, Brad, we are still in talking." I congratulate him to this deal. Obviously, MoneyGram needed something and Ripple needed something. That sounds a good deal. But for us, it's currently, we are pretty much okay with our settlement system. We can move money in a way that nobody can move it, so that works. But look, hey, I'm open. Any cost savings, any innovation, I'm there. I have, we can sign a deal tomorrow.
About the future of cryptocurrencies, where do you see the future of these digital assets, and maybe the role of Bitcoin and Ripple or XRP in that future?
Yeah, so our view is that these digital assets really become supplemental to the existing family of currencies, right? So every country still needs its own, fiat currency for all kinds of reasons that I won't get into it. Very complicated, right? And I actually think that the big four, the yen, the euro, the dollar, the RMB, they actually, I think, come stronger in this world that we're going into, partially because of digital assets.
Okay.
That these digital assets actually contribute to a world that's more interoperable, where more people around the globe can get access to these big four. And most of global commerce is done in the big four. So I think you have a bifurcation going on. Those big four get stronger. I think some of the smaller currencies, maybe even some more of the very small fiat currencies, become less relevant, maybe even disappear. A country could have its own fiat, but still use one of the big four. You have lots of
like
examples.
Montenegro, right?
Absolutely. But I think then where the digital assets fit in, like things like XRP and Bitcoin, they're kind of in that mid-range. They become, I think, like the Singapore dollar or the Swiss franc, and they become useful in kind of lubricating the world to make it easier for those big four to get in the hands of people all around the world. So that's useful. And then it might also be things like applications and devices that maybe primarily use one of those digital assets. So that's kind of the view we have. So I think in that world, countries should be less threatened by what's going on and see them as simply supplemental rather than a threat. Too much talk about it being a threat. Our industry has done a bad job in too much bravado and chest pounding. It's just kind of silly.
Generally speaking, we certainly are very cognizant of the risks that crypto assets present, which I'll talk about in a few seconds. But we also see the potential that they have for making the global financial system more efficient and more inclusive than is currently the case. So the challenge is then to design regulatory frameworks that allow innovation to happen, to allow these use cases to go ahead, while appropriately mitigating the risks.
A young digital coin here.
Right.
Who's leading
Well, it depends a little bit how we talk about leading. I mean, China, to your point, it's been fascinating to see it. I mean, they really, through mining power, control the Bitcoin blockchain. You have 4 miners in China that represent something like 60+% of mining capacity, and 80% of mining capacity is based in China for both Bitcoin and Ether. So in many ways, I think China's been incredibly strategic about how they think about that.
Yes.
So I think the future is really about adoption, right? So what happens is, in some way, we suffer from the market hype, right? So like you mentioned, we are Bitcoin for adults, right? So the moment people think Bitcoin, speculative, terrorists using it, drug money using it, and what we suffer from is there are legit use cases of digital assets which will help the economies dramatically. And XRP is one of them. We are not there to replace central banks. We are not there to replace fiat currencies. What we are saying is there is an effective bridge that is required between the two, and that's a 3-second bridge or a 4-second bridge that can bring efficiencies, which can make transfers cheaper. It can make sure that the liquidity can be provided on demand. And when we explain this to central bankers, we explain to the banks that we work with, then we get that aha moment. But till
So I got asked this last week. I was speaking at a Morgan Stanley conference, and somebody asked me, there was this headline, set of headlines about, about the JPM coin. And this guy was from Morgan Stanley who was interviewing me. I said, so is Morgan Stanley going to use the JPM coin? Like, probably not. And so, well, is Citi going to use the JPM coin? Is B of A going to use the JPM coin? Is PNC? And the answer is no. And so does that mean we're all going to have these different coins? And does that mean like we're back to where we are, where there's lack of interoperability? So like, what? I don't get it. One more quick thing on JPM coin. So let's think about this. The JPM coin, they announced for institutional customers, if you give them $1 in deposits, they'll give you a JPM coin that you then can move within the JPM ledger. Wait a minute, just use the $1.
Right.
Well, I really don't understand. Like, if you're just moving it within the JPM ledger, and it has to be dollar to dollar, a 1-to-1 backing, it honestly doesn't actually, I don't understand what problem that solves.
Bringing back the gold standard would be very hard to do, but boy, would it be wonderful. We'd have a standard on which to base our money.
A solid country, because it was based on a gold standard. We don't have that anymore. There is something very nice about the concept of that. It would be very, very hard to do at this point, and one of the problems is we don't have the gold. Other places have the gold.
It doesn't have to be gold. But since central banks in over 100 countries already hold gold as part of their international reserves, it seems a good, neutral reserve asset. I like the idea of a gold standard. I mean, it could be used in a very cryptocurrency way. The point is, do you have a unified money system so that when you talk about the international marketplace, everyone is playing on a level monetary playing field? We need another Bretton Woods, or at least we need to be thinking in terms of a neutral reference point, a global unit of account. I mean, something like a gold standard even, updated to reflect a digital world and fast-moving financial flows. Important that we get ahead of the curve to ensure that the dollar continues to offer the best currency in the world, the most respected, the most utilized, and we need fintech innovation to keep us going in the right direction and to be a leader.
If the appeal of cryptocurrencies is their capacity to provide a common currency and to maintain a uniform value for every issued unit. We need only consult historical experience to ascertain that these same qualities were achieved through the classical international gold standard without sacrificing the sovereignty of individual nations. To the contrary, gold standard rules permit nations to participate voluntarily by operating in accordance with the discipline of gold convertibility of their own currency. A modern version of this approach, one that permits the issuance of virtual currencies in tandem with government-issued currencies. Adapting legal tender laws to permit healthy currency competition should be put forward.
Invest in Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies.
Well, one, I tell them to be careful, okay? They should be clear why they're investing in them. There's a lot of good things to invest in, obviously we know about.
But also there's, I think, new things that happen in this space. The firms that store these assets, these are effectively digital bearer instruments. So not unlike diamonds or gold or some other bearer instrument, but they're digital, which makes them very, very attractive to people who might want to steal them. Hence there's been so much activity around theft on these kinds of cryptographically secured assets. And so regulations around the custody of digital assets is a really critical need, and something that a number of jurisdictions have actually put forward and built very specific rules around how do we custody these types of digital assets. I think, as I've also talked about,
God, I really wish I could answer that, but I'm under a non-disclosure agreement with PolySign, and because they're in stealth mode right now, I don't know what I'm allowed to tell you. I can tell you that they're in the custody business, and of course I can tell you that they're doing it like an amazing way, that, you know, Arthur and I are behind this, we're the lead guys on the technology, and obviously like we're doing it, we think we're doing it right, but unfortunately, I don't know what. I really wish I could tell you because it's so freaking cool. I'm busting with wanting to tell people what we did, and they're like, oh no, we're still in stealth mode, it's still non-disclosure, so unfortunately I cannot answer that question, but I feel really bad about it.
Really looking to the state to give that out, and unfortunately some of the states have very old computerized equipment from many generations ago. But they have the money to give out, and they'll give it out as it comes, and hopefully they'll be able to do the job. Some states have been very efficient, and others have had a hard time, but you'll work with the ones that have had a hard time. But we rely on the states, and we are relying on the states to get it out as quickly as they can, considering especially some of the equipment they have. Maybe now they'll be able to buy new equipment, right? When we get all finished, we'll have nice new computerized equipment so they can do it. With that, if you'd like to ask a few questions.
And there is a concept of tipping point, and the funny thing about a tipping point is it's obvious it's happened only after it's happened.
Do you still believe that we should maintain the fundamental principles of Social Security as it did 83?
I think we should maintain the principles of Social Security, but I think the existing structure is not working, and that until we can construct a system which creates the savings that are required to build the real assets so that the retirees have real goods and services, we don't have a system that's working. We have one that basically moves cash around, and we can guarantee cash benefits as far out and at whatever size you like, but we cannot guarantee their purchasing power. And this is why the issue ultimately has got to be resolved in terms of, do we have the material goods and services that people will need to consume, not whether or not we pass some hurdle with respect to how legal financing occurs, because financing is a secondary issue, and it's the means to create the real wealth, not an end in itself.
We have not been on such a path for some time, which just means that the debt is growing faster than the economy. This is not the time to act on those concerns. This is the time to use the great fiscal power of the United States to do what we can to support the economy and try to get through this with as little damage to the longer run productive capacity of the economy as possible. The time will come again, and reasonably soon, I think, where we can think about a long-term way to get our fiscal house in order, and we absolutely need to do that. But this is not the time to be, in my personal view, this is not the time to let that concern, which is a very serious concern, but to let that get in the way of us winning this battle, really.
And what I'm concerned is that in the minds of some, there could be this logic, well, we shrunk the economy, emissions are falling, maybe now we can push the pause button and then return to fighting the other crisis, the climate crisis, sometime in the future. And I just want to say very clearly, nothing can be further from the truth. We are about to deploy an enormous, gigantic fiscal stimulus, and we can do it in a way that we fight both crises at the same time. We are projecting that the fund this year growth to slow down to -3%, to go down, maybe even worse. And then we are projecting a recovery in 2021. At this point, we are saying 5.8% partial recovery, but still a significant jump in growth. if this recovery is to be sustainable, if our world is to come out of this crisis more resilient, we must do everything in our power to a more resilient future.
Give me some context on the XRP ledger, where it started and where we are today.
Well, I started working on what we now call the XRP ledger at the end of 2011. So I've been at this for, 8-9 years now. It kind of feels like forever. But the changes have been drastic. I mean, in the early days, all we had was the ability to perform a transaction on a decentralized ledger in just a couple of seconds. And then we started to realize that the properties of the algorithms that we developed allowed us to do things like a decentralized exchange. And then we had this idea of allowing people to issue assets and ideas like community credit. And we put all that together into a functional system probably in mid-2012.
Why is robustness so important today with so many payment providers and financial networks that are depending on the XRP ledger?
You have to realize that you're talking about billions of dollars in a system that doesn't have an administrator. There's nobody that you can go to if it messes up. And so reliability is the number one property. And it means that these systems are very slow to develop and evolve. In the early days, before I was working on the XRP ledger and I was looking at Bitcoin, and we sort of had this idea that if there was any new feature, Bitcoin would just adopt it. We now know that that's hopelessly naive because any change to a system like this imposes costs on everybody who uses the system. With any other piece of software, a company will release a new version of the software. Say Oracle releases a new version, and they'll say to people who have like mission critical deployments, don't upgrade to the new version. Just use the current version, give us a little bit of time, test it, whatever. You can't really do that on a public blockchain. If the rules change, people have to run software with the new rules. If you want to ask why these systems don't move more quickly, why they don't add features on a regular basis, that's why.
You've suggested changes for the XRP ledger. Can you give us an overview of what those changes are and what they might mean for the network?
I've suggested a bunch of changes that fall into several different categories. One of those categories is like core consensus improvements. One of the things that I've said a lot is that proof of work is kind of a technological dead end. It works fine. I'm not saying it doesn't work. I'm just saying that there hasn't been any significant innovation in it. There are also changes that are in the form of new features. One of the features that I think is very exciting is a feature that would allow people to launch well, stablecoins are the obvious use case, but it's not just stablecoins. It's essentially assets pegged to some external value. Features similar to that exist on other systems, but the interesting thing about this is that the liquidity is guaranteed by the ledger mechanics.
Why is liquidity important for market stability and health then?
I think even to take a step back, liquidity has a lot of components that are important to kind of address. So one of which is immediacy. So I think about that as how quickly can I get access to markets and how quickly can I trade into and out of this asset or token for another asset. I think about the breadth of the market. So breadth is sort of how you think about the trading volumes at different prices in the order book, and then depth of the market. And depth of the market is really about how many orders there are close to exactly where the price is currently trading of varying sizes, which would imply that you could get a lot of volume through without having much price movement as you're trading into and out of the asset. And then in addition, accessibility is very important. So accessibility is just probably as it intuitively sounds, the ability to access markets to trade in those assets very easily. And that can be geographically or through multiple infrastructure partners, whether it's exchanges or OTC desks or what have you. And the last key attribute of a healthy liquid market is really resilience. And that is getting at the ability for a market to recover from a significant systemic event. So if there was some sort of a market shock, the ability for order books to get back to normality and tighten back to similar prices to where they were prior to that event relatively quickly. And so all of those attributes are very important to a healthy liquid market.
How does deeper liquidity impact services like on-demand liquidity or ODL?
That's a great question. So as you think about the value that we're providing sending flow from the US to Mexico, because we're able to use XRP as the bridge currency between the US and Mexico and do basically instantaneous transactions, we are significantly reducing the cost base sending that money cross-border. And the view that we're delivering and focused on enterprises is true, enterprise solutions to help them perform their business more efficiently. But as we do that, we're really giving them the opportunity to pass on the fee savings through leveraging our technology and infrastructure to their everyday consumers. So somebody living in America who is working and sending money back to their family in Mexico, we're really thrilled that the work that we're doing is really driving value to the bottom line and to everyday consumers.
I will explain cryptocurrency by clicking a link to TV's most beloved scientist, Mr. Jim Parsons.
People think I'm a nerd, but I'm actually super cool. That's why I'm here to talk about the really cool subject of distributed consensus-based cryptocurrency. Ka-chinga. Could a nerd do that? I don't think so. For cryptocurrency to work, we need a record of every transaction that occurs. These are recorded in what's called a distributed ledger.
I'm a consensus of shared and synchronized digital data spread across multiple platforms from Shanghai to Grenada. Each day I'm closer to being cash of the future, not in your wallet, I'm in your computer. Oh yeah!
When you use the currency, the transaction is recorded in the ledger.
I can dig it.
And when one ledger book gets filled up, we add to a chain of previous books. That's the blockchain.
Later, glitches.
If you'd like to learn more about how cryptocurrencies work, here's everything else you need to know. And goodbye from me, super cool Jim Parsons. It went in! 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 You saw it! It went in!